We're probably all now aware that birth rates are declining in many Western countries, including the UK and across Europe. Here's a quick visualization from Sky News.
Now, this shows what is called the replacement rate. To keep a country's population stable, every woman must have 2.1 babies. So above the dotted line, the population is replaced. Below, it declines. And you can see that global decline in the rate in orange. But it's more pronounced in certain areas, including Europe here in dark blue and in the UK in red.
Now, this trend of lower fertility rates tends to be explained by right-wing commentators as the fault of selfish, career-driven millennials, or because young people today are a generation of adult babies who can barely look after themselves and lack the will and maturity to have families of their own. But the new UN Population Fund study released today found something quite different. The State of World Population Report found that 1 in 5 people globally aren't able to have the number of children they want. The UNFPA surveyed 14,000 people across 14 countries, and most people expect to have fewer children than they would actually like. As you can see in the graph on screen, 54% of those surveyed said financial worries like housing costs, childcare, and job insecurity would likely mean they can't have as many kids as they'd like. Perhaps it's hardly surprising when young people in the UK are struggling to get on the housing ladder. Average UK monthly private rents increased by 8.1% to just over £1,300 per month in the 12 months to February 2025. And if you're renting in London, you're likely to spend between 1/3 and 2/3 of your income on putting a roof over your head. Last month, UK inflation jumped to 3.5%, its highest rate in more than a year, after dramatic increases in water bills, energy costs, and council tax. Couple that with the slowing of wage growth and rising levels of unemployment, and you've got a perfect storm of financial factors that mean people aren't in a secure economic position to be having kids when they actually do want them. The UN report also highlights gender inequality as a driver of both declining fertility rates and slowing economies. It cites a lack of gender-equal and family-friendly workplaces as one of the most significant reasons women don't enter the workforce. And who is speaking up for family-friendly policies in the UK? Well, it's this guy.
One of the problems is a lot of people who want to go back to work, and it's normally women. It's men in some cases, but it's normally women. There are other huge issues around childcare. Big questions that have been raised with me. Why in our big workplaces are there not creches when there are in many other continental countries?
Not Nigel Farage taking a leaf out of the EU's book when it comes to workplace creches. Helena, this problem of a low fertility or dropping fertility rate is often put in terms of social reproduction. Like, we're not creating enough of the next generation in order to support the state, the elderly, and so on and so forth. But it can also be put another way. I mean, it's just, absolutely miserable that economic conditions mean that for many people, and I'm not saying all people, but for many people for whom children would be having children would be one of the most meaningful things that they ever do in their life, they're not able to, or they're not able to have as many as they would like. Do you think creches in workplaces are the solution to this?
Against the wall, thinking about all the different myriad reasons why we see in 1975 just this big drop-off in birth rates everywhere. Everywhere across the world, we see this massive drop-off, and there are so many different theories as to why this is. A combination of factors of declining religiosity, increased urbanization, the rise of freely available kind of contraception. We see all these different things. We've got women in the workplace having children later, prioritizing careers. There's so many different facets to the reason why we got to this. And I couldn't, for any amount of analysis and looking at trends and looking at correlation, find which of these factors was the most important, because countries that are capitalist, socialist in the East and the West, from different levels of religiosity or completely secular, like all of these factors didn't seem, when I looked at the data, to truly affect whether or not there was a fertility rate that was going up or down or collapsing, when they all collapsed at the same time. All weirdly in 1975. It was very, very strange when I was looking at this data. And when you look at, for example, at the measures that are being proposed in lots of Western countries, right? Look at Hungary. Hungary is a country that's obsessed. It's obsessed with its declining fertility rate. You look at Japan, also very obsessed. And the states have tried everything. They have tried the whole gamut of policies to try and get people to have more kids, right? You see all these state policies, such as Japan wanting to do this kind of state publicly owned dating app to try and get people to meet each other. We had Hungary doing all these kind of tax breaks and cash handouts. And these things haven't worked either. It's been a real kind of conundrum as to all the kind of the gamut of policies that you would need to fix these problems. I'm not saying that crashes in workplaces wouldn't necessarily at least have some effect, but I feel like that there's this kind of combination really of the necessity for people to be able to go out and work in an urbanized environment. When urban versus rural, you have far more kids if you live in a rural environment. Urbanization is happening everywhere and has happened everywhere significantly since 1975. And that is one way in which the living arrangements have made it harder to have children. And of course, not only do have women been encouraged to work more often because it is a way in which we have created more gender equality, but they also haven't had the labor of doing child rearing taken off them broadly in Western countries, right? There's a thing called the gender equality paradox, which is that in the most kind of gender equal countries in law, a lot of gender imbalances still persist. If you look at Western countries specifically, you look at Sweden, you look at Norway, you look at Denmark, in terms of the professions women go into, the level of childcare that they have to do within their own family, even when both parents work, is higher than in countries that are outside the West. And for example, you look at the Soviet Union. Actually, they didn't see this big kind of drop-off in fertility rates in 1975. It was kind of middling throughout the entirety of that period because they urbanized pretty quickly and very, very quickly during the kind of Stalinist period. Obviously, there were other factors around that too. But they actually saw an increase in fertility during the 80s where it was dropping everywhere else, right? And so I think, in my mind, a kind of combination of a level of state input into childcare, the level to which that there was kind of guaranteed housing at 5% of people's incomes, is the places I would start looking at policy, right? Because even if you look at other socialist countries in that period, like Cuba, the high level of religiosity in Cuba you'd think would have them not have the drop off in birth rates. Cuba's the same as everywhere else. It's the same as everywhere else in terms of the fertility rate dropping off in the 70s and in the 80s, which you don't see in the Soviet Union. So I'm not trying to say I have all of the answers here, but the fact that the data is showing that the biggest concern out of everything that is stopping people from having the children that they want, not just from being put into the kind of ideological position where they feel like they don't want to have kids or they're prioritizing their own careers. They feel like they don't have the economic ability to be able to do so. So I think that plenty of things that we could do, such as investment in childcare, in stipends to people to have kids, or indeed, if we were to do things like having a 4-day week, if we were to embrace automation as a way of doing labor saving rather than as a way of maintaining corporate profits, right? Giving people more time to be able to keep a standard of living whilst fixing the housing crisis and also giving them time to child rear at the same time, in trying to have a culture in which we have a more egalitarian approach, just like there's outside the West in some other countries too, and like the post-Soviet world, for men to take a more active role in child rearing. So in a new world where both people work, there is more incentive for somebody to want to have kids when it wouldn't impact their career. These are all things that I would like to see. Do I have all the answers? Well, obviously I don't. This is just pure speculation, but it does seem to be a real existential problem that a lot of policies that have been tried so far have not been successful yet.